Hello, Varsha ji. I have joined.
Okay, thank you so much, Suhit. Thank you.
Hello Varsha ji. Hello Suhit.
Hello,
Chandramohan.
Madhu. Hi,
Hi.
hello,
Hi.
Chandramohan.
Hi. Hi.
Hi, Shamayita. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's session, which is a panel discussion, a workshop criticism, new voices in contemporary poetry, a brief survey. Apologies. Today we have with us four young and dynamic poets who have been very active and very opinionated in their poems. They have spoken about almost everything which have happened around the years, and they have this voice. Uh, Give me a moment. Yeah, okay. Shamoita, your video is not on. I think that is why the problem. Okay, you will have to press the mic button. There is a microphone button. You'll have to press it and then only you would be able to unmute yourself. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's panel discussion, workshop criticism, new voices in contemporary poetry, a brief survey. We feel glad to welcome four very young dynamic poets with us, Chandramohan Satyanathan, Suhit Kelkar, Madhu Raghavendra, and Shamayita Sen. Welcome to all of you, and I also welcome our esteemed audience. We have with us our respected principals as well, and some very senior professors, our students, friends, fellow poets, and some guests. So we start with today's panel discussion, but before that, I'll have to read out the introduction of the four poets who have joined us today. Uh, this is special because we have with us a lot of young students who have admitted into graduation, and we felt the need of introducing them to some young poets who are writing at these times. To start with, Chandramohan Satyanathan. Chandramohan Satyanathan is an Indian English language poet and literary critic based in Trivandrum, Kerala. His accolades include being on the shortlist for the Srinivas Rai Prol Poetry Prize 2016 and a fellowship at the International Writing Program 2018 at the University of Iowa. His books of poems titled Letters to Namdev Dhasil, which was published in 2016, was on the shortlist for the Yuva Puraskar of Sahitya Academy. He organizes literary meets of English poets of Kerala, both online and offline. In the year 2016, Outlook magazine profiled him as one of the high achievers from the Dalit community. His book Love After Babel and Other Poems was published in Canada in 2020. Now, it would be very important to read a poem of Chandramohan before we move ahead to our another poet. So this is a poem by Chandramohan, which is titled The Shadow of My Memory. He has quoted William Weaver, Italo Calvino's poem translated by William Weaver, a short section, An Unreliable Shadow of Memory, unquote. I am the poet fixing images from the abyss of time into the canvas of the past, where myth and history are miscible with the precision and swiftness of a fork-tongued cobra strike. To retrieve my memory, I tame an eagle with my lyrics. When sung with my blood-red tongue, the eagle glides over my landscape, scanning for rivulets of my bloodstream, wearing off my footprint trail. I grip the aerial roots of a banyan tree with my palm. I envisage an oral lyric swaying with the winds of the time. After being scripted into the soil, roots seek architecture with breathing space for all, where I inhale an anti clockwise birth. In the preordained oral ellipse of a prophecy, I retrieve myself. That is, ladies and gentlemen, Chandramohan Satyanathan. Moving ahead to another poet of the day, Suhit Kelkar. Suhit Kelkar's poetry has appeared in several Indian and international journals, including the Charles River Journal, Speak, Poetry at Sangam, Vayavya, the Bengaluru Review, the Indian Quarterly, and the Bombay Literary Magazine, among others. His short stories have appeared in First Post and Out of Print magazine. His debut book is a poetry chapbook named The Centaur Chronicles, 2018, which uses the figure of a centaur to explore themes of exclusion, discrimination, and otherness. His book of photographs and haiku, titled Mumbai Monochrome, was released in 2020. Now, a poem written by Suhit Kelkar. This is titled The Hummingbird and I. This poem was published in the Charles River Journal in 2019. The Hummingbird and I. If all ends, the oceans will fold us into their muddy rug, turning our lovely and ugly selves alike into food for such fish as are alive. Till then, I thank the woman of the waters who takes each night's moon to term, who wafts it through the star-stained sky to silver all that breathes and doesn't. Grateful for the kindness of creation, untainted with melancholy, unmixed with the self-destructiveness, gently as a knot unraveling, I unclench. The lockjaw that shackled my breath slackens and I am able to part my lips. So the hummingbird hovering near my face, in search of a portal, can lay its eggs on the tree of my ribs and bring its fledglings a mouthful of love, soft and succulent. That is, ladies and gentlemen, a poem by Suhit Kelkar. Moving ahead to the next poet of the day, Madhu Raghavendra. Madhu Raghavendra, poet, curator, and social activist, has authored 3 books of poetry titled Make Me Some Love to Eat, Stick No Bills, and Being Non-Essential. He is the founder of the Poetry Couture, a movement that has created free spaces for poetry in many cities of India, including the Northeast. He uses performance poetry as a tool to advocate human and environmental rights. He regularly curates and reads for the iHub American Center, Delhi. He collaborates with global artists to create cross-disciplinary poetry experiences. His poems have been set to classical music and contemporary dance. He conducts performance poetry workshops for young adults and reads at many literary festivals across India. His works have been featured in many literary journals. Now, a poem by Madhu Raghavendra for all of you. This is a recently written poem. You would be able to understand its essence while I read it. It is titled Bastaria Beer. I go to villages to record hope and love and anthropometry of children suffering from centuries of inaccurate averages. In Bastar, the Gonds live in villages without roads, their independence yet to be taken. It's morning, the rains have nowhere to go. No men, no women, no brokers, none broken. We sit around in a thatch hut smeared with cow dung and drink sulfi, Bastaria beer. Milk is for calves, meat for people. Minced, hung above smoke and fire, cured to taste. The dance of vegetarianism is across the river, where men did not learn to hunt wild rabbits or enjoy the pleasures of cockfights. We pick children playing with piglets. You frolic with the ones you love and eat them when you are hungry. We time travel to the BC era to tell them they are undernourished according to some org in Geneva. There is no free nipples campaign, free the nipples campaign. They are free. Their eyes hollow from the sounds of the rounds of gunfires in neighboring villages. Tell us more than their mid upper arm circumference. The measuring tapes go green, go yellow. The red ones look better than urban anorex models. We invade homes with stadiometers. A woman tells me she can make these height measuring machines herself. We are on the either side of the widening river. I cannot translate stadiometer in Gondi, nor tell her it's confirmed European certified. I tell her, you don't know, they are global standards. She tells me, you don't know, our village would. Only I may not get that unnatural shine. The infinities, right and wrong, who can tell the potency of their stale rice porridge page? And that is a poem by Madhu Raghavendra, ladies and gentlemen,
Thank
who
you,
has
Varsha.
been uh, who has been read by, I think, many people worldwide. If you go to the internet, you would be able to find out more about Madhu, who has been writing amazing poems. Now, moving ahead to our fourth poet of the evening, Shamoita Sen. Well, I asked Shamoita about the pronunciation of her name because I didn't want to get it wrong. So I called her and asked, Shamoita, how do I pronounce your name? And I was saying Shamaita. And she said that, it happens, most of people, they call me Shamayita or something. But it is, pronounced it's a basically Bangla word. I don't know if you would be able to pronounce it. It's Shamoita. So to keep it on record, it's Shamoita Singh, ladies and gentlemen. Shamoita Singh is a PhD research scholar at the Department of English, University of Delhi. She has been writing poetry since her days at Bethune College, Kolkata. Her research articles and poems have been published in various academic and literary journals in India and abroad. Her first collection of poems, For the Hope of Spring, Hybrid Poems, has been published by Havakal Publishers in 2020. She is currently working on a poetry anthology. She is from Kolkata, currently based in Delhi, India. And now it's time for a poem by Shamoita Singh. Dream. Without proper documentation of events, no, you are in the middle of a dream. Or so Lacan began a lecture. Like silencing partition violence or rape survivors is placing them back to a limbo they fought hard to be relieved of. Dream is a moment of confusion about waking up within deep slumber, or is a Kafkaesque trivializing of memory to a momentary mishap, like migrant laborers stranded in cities or run over by trains, transfixed in their reverie under the sun. Dreams sometimes also teleport the dead into life. But then, can death be a dream too? That was, ladies and gentlemen, a poem by Shamoita Sen. And I hope all of you are now slightly familiar with the poets we're going to talk to today. Now, moving ahead to the questions of the day. I hope our speakers are comfortable. They have no issues with their mics and everything, so that we can start with the questions now. Yeah. So I'll start. I'll read out a question, and then we'll take answers from all of four of you one by one, if that is okay. Right? Okay. To start with, Chandramohan Satyanathan. Chandramohan, this is the question for you. What exactly does poetry as a form offer you that you have taken to it as a medium of creative expression?
Yeah. So, if so I think if you ask a poet, most of them would say that the form chose the person than the poet choosing the poet. Like it's like the poetry had no, the art form poetry has chosen those of us who identify themselves or who are being ascribed the title of being a poet. That's one thing. Secondly, is that the fact that yeah, it is that I believe poetry has the most I don't know, there is some kind of a brevity in it, so it's the most effective in terms of the literary art forms compared to short story, novel, or any other art forms. Poetry has a highest amount of potency per word, so it's that kind of brevity plus potency that draws me to it. But mostly somebody is a poet by instinct than the poet working towards become a poet. So once you have that instinct or whatever, that passion for writing, and then the art form choosing you, like extensive reading, working on your craft, like familiarity with contemporary poetry, devouring other poets, reading the three other poets in the panel today. Varsha herself being a poet, reading all your works enriches me. That's all I have to say. I believe that's very yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandramohan. The same question would now go to Suhit Kelkar. Suhit, what do you think? What exactly does poetry as a form offer to you?
Uh, First of all, thank you, Varsha ji, for inviting me to this forum and to such a large number of people who have come out to hear us. So let me just say in answer that poetry provides me with a sort of an anesthetic against the ugliness of the world. There are large parts of the modern world which are extremely ugly. I'm not saying that the world is an ugly place. I'm saying that a large part of it is very, very ugly. It's inhuman. And poetry offers me a sort of balm against that sort of inhumanity. It offers me a form of solace through its beauty. So that when you feel that you're creating some beauty, you feel better about yourself and about the world that you live in. I hope that is some sort of an answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Suhit. Now we would move to Madhu Raghavendra. Madhu, I think you have heard the question already. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Varsha. And I really want to congratulate you on the beautiful curation you've put together. Chandra is a great friend, a beautiful writer, someone I adore. Suhit is a lovely poet. I've read him. And Shamayita is a new friend. And so, yeah, lovely curation. And I love our voices are so beautifully different. And thanks for curating such a lovely event to begin with. And yes, I mean, I mean the whole idea of brevity and that I think I agree with, and the idea that you can carry a song, a poem in your back pocket all the time, or the back pocket of your heart, is something that really, and as Suhit put it, I think let me just take on from Chandra and Suhit and just read you this short piece probably and see it through poetry. It is equal space. For me, poetry has been a space where I go for a room probably which has equal despair and equal hope. So this is called hope. Some days the table, paper, pen, nothing gives me hope. Someday the table, paper, pen, nothing gives me hope. I turn the table upside down, tear the page, throw the pen. I turn to the world and see women burn, farmers cry, oppressors divide, agencies lie. I see megalomaniac murderers dig mass graves, world leaders pointing to a leaking barrel of hope. I rearrange the table, pull new sheets, look for my pen, and go back to writing poetry. So, as Suhit said, the world outside is getting so dystopian that you would create your own space of madness and stay in there probably, and that's one reason to choose poetry. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Madhu. The amazing poem. Now we would move to Shamayita. Shamayita, the same question. What exactly does poetry as a form offer to you that you have taken it as a medium of creative expression?
Hello, everyone. Um, I'm really thankful to be a part of this panel. Let me just begin with that first. Okay, so I have started writing poetry long back, maybe. And whenever I sit to write poetry, it it is cathartic. I have tried various forms. Say, for instance, whether they are theoretical articles whether they are personal essays. So basically, prose as well as poetry. Now, prose triggers some kind of traumatic memories, but poetry, on the other hand, is cathartic. So that is the reason I think I have chosen poetry, or poetry, like Chandramohan had mentioned, poetry has chosen me. Also, um, with the current scenario, the kind of political and the social evils that surround us, I think poetry is a great medium to talk about certain taboo topics, which is not so easily taken up in regular conversations. So I think that is another reason I had stuck to poetry. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamayita, for an amazing answer. Um, Now we'll move on to the second question. In recent years, there have been numerous attempts at distorting history or rephrasing history in different ways. How does history, if you know it at all, or affect you, inspire you, or condition you as a poet? Because while I was reading your poems, I could see a lot of historical references and going back to history again and again. So, what would you like to say about it? Chandramohan, we would like to start with you.
Yeah. So I was just curious. So my observation would be like, see, uh, what something that is common to all of us is history, but the versions that are available to us vary. As a result, as more and more writers with marginalized are introduced into mainstream, we get versions of their story that are incorporated to become what we know as history today. But there are two aspects to like distortion of history. First is that uh, first is that what is today sold as history is some form of fables agreed upon, where the winner writes his tales and they are being agreed upon as history now. So that's one thing. Then secondly, if after the rise of the Sangh Parivar, there has been attempts to artificially construct history that suit like saffron agenda, which I believe have been opposed tooth and nail by the progressives of today. But more importantly, what happens is, say, let's assume that a, 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 a scholar and poet like Varsha reads history of her geography uh, from a feminist standpoint, then there is a new kind of reading or an interpretation that is given that only Miss Varsha can do. So it is by this process that we get a new history, or we get a rephrasing of history. As a result, there is a much more egalitarian world and a breathing space for all, as I would imagine. Also, I like to point out a recent movement during the heights of COVID lockdown, in which all the symbols of slavery in the Western world, the Confederate flag, all the symbols of like statues of icons who allegedly have partaken in the act of slavery, and facilitated the process of slavery. Their statues were removed, desecrated, etc. And also all the so there has been a rewriting of history from this standpoint. So so like how history informs a poet is that history and the rights enjoyed by various marginalized sections have a sort of relationship. It is when the stories of the Mahars of Maharashtra become popular that Dalit that it is a direct bearing on the rights that lower caste enjoy today, or the tale of, say, Savitri Bai Phule, or her tales, like the history of these people when they are mainstreamized. It results in very dramatic democratization of society, which is happening today. So that's how I look at history, poetry, writing, etc. Yeah, I'm eager to listen to what the poets have to say, about history and writing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chandramohan. We would now move on to Suhit. Suhit, please, your views, please.
So I mean, I completely would like to second what Chandramohan has said here. And but so instead of repeating what he's saying, I want to focus on another aspect of history as a technical tool. Uh, History is basically, you can the poet who is very, very careful and very studious, and also understands how history and myth intersect, can use history as a tool of narrative, often to recover the submerged voices or the marginalized voices, to give them a lyrical sort of silver lining, to to basically conserve and highlight parts of history that have been suppressed. What were the balladeers doing? What were, for instance, the shahirs doing during the Sayukta Maharashtra movement? What were they doing in the independence struggle? Uh, they were creating role models. They were creating conservation of submerged history. So I think poetry for me, especially when it comes to things like the climate crisis, which is something that I am writing extensively about. History plays a very, very crucial part in it, but not as a. But I must also add here that when history becomes a subject of poetry, it transforms. It doesn't remain mere narrative. It becomes a poetic artifact. So there is an alchemy involved when you are using history in your poetry. Subject to that, I think history is very, very a knowledge of history is highly important when it comes to sort of creating narratives in poetry.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Suhit.
Suhit. Yeah, thank you, Suhit. Yeah, I'm going next. Yeah, um, exactly. And this is, I think Chandra and others would agree that a poet's place is again in the margins. No wonder poetry is not bought and paid and sold and been in the stock market, because a poet's place is necessarily in the margins, and that's where. And I do agree that this idea of one India looks like, or even when we say now that I'm based in the Northeast for a while, I mean, the idea of Northeast is just okay on paper or as political. I mean, and we all are so multicultural today, Varsha, you would agree, and even the students can relate to this. That, I mean, I'm a Tanjore Maharashtrian, born and brought up in Calcutta, worked all my life in different areas in public health across India, married to a Arunachali, living in Guwahati, Assam. So, I mean, we are all these multicultural people already before even we come to the art form. Like, so that, and that is unique to India. Like, in no way you can compare any of these things. I mean, Maharashtra to any other space. Everything, I mean, has its own beauty, and that's and the unification, or just saying that, I mean, the idea of just whatever. I mean, saying that okay, the South Indians should learn Hindi is like fine. It sounds okay, and but there has to be a lot of respect and a lot of like really dignity, maintaining the dignity of multicultural, especially. And how I try to, and I love the fact, because I've started, I've had this huge respect for translation always, and what I do through my work is definitely only not only include, like, for example, write poems about which I feel about tea tribes in Assam. Like, tea tribes in Assam is the only tribe probably which is named after a commodity. Most tribes have names. So, these kind of histories, I like to look at it, because history, we tend to see something as which is past or which is distant. No, history is now. What I do today, tomorrow is going to become history. So it is as present as anything in today's world. And so for me, I do a lot of translation, and now that, especially from Jharkhand, that I do a lot of poets from Jharkhand. I mean, Shushma Asur is there, because I love the idea that there is a lot of voices which are coming in, and Shushma Asur, Vandana Tete, and all are from Ranchi, Jharkhand almost. And I also love how Jacinta Kerketa puts in one of her two-lined poem in this idea that, I mean, these kind of narrations, multiple narratives that are being devoured in the sense of unification, supposedly, because the diversity has to be intact. So Jacinta says that um, वो हमारे मनुष्य होने का वो हमारे सभ्य होने का इंतजार कर रहे हैं वो हमारे सभ्य होने का इंतजार कर रहे हैं और हम उनके मनुष्य होने का. So, the idea that you're trying to say that the tribals should become civil and civilized, and what does it mean? I mean, what does develop? So, yeah. So, I think as poets, Suhit, Chandra, Shamayita, I think we are all always debating with a lot of questions all the time with ourselves. And I think, yeah, that is where the history comes in, and we tend to always go back to history as if it is happening now, because history is again repeating itself in a huge way. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Madhu. That was an amazing answer. Shamayita, moving to you now.
So I agree with what all of you have spoken about. There are two things that I would probably want to mention when we are talking about history. Um, most of us who are writing at present, we are writing from a very privileged position. It is probably that is the reason we are able to write, and I think we are a product of the history that we have, that has either been presented to us or we have chosen to believe in. I know, as a matter of fact, and I tell this to a few of my female cousins who have achieved certain things in life, that without the feminist movement, if at all I'm supposed to pick up one social movement, then without the feminist movement, we wouldn't have been educated in the first place. So we are all a product of history. And then we want to choose and believe in certain kinds of history. Moving on to the second point that I wanted to mention in regards to history and how it inspires me or how it affects my writing is history is actually something that teaches us. So when we are moving into experimental teaching and experiential learning in schools and colleges these days, we are told as teachers, we must tell the students or the learners why are we teaching them certain things in the class, or why is it a part of the syllabus. Similarly, like when we are teaching history or when we are understanding or reading history, uh, we know the aim of history is to teach us about certain uh, problems or certain frailties in regimes that the human beings at present shouldn't repeat. So I think this is one of the major reasons. We get back to history. We try to understand how what not to repeat, and repeat our mistakes. I guess I have reached out. That makes some sense. Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
it does. Thank you, Shamayita. I hope our fellow poets agree with, are fine with what Shamayita has said right now, and we can move ahead to another question now. Okay, so the third question. To quote Arthur Rimbaud, the poet is responsible for humanity, for animals even. He will have to make sure his visions can be smelled, fondled, listened to. If what he brings back from beyond has form, he gives it form. If it has none, he gives it none. A language must be found of the soul, for the soul, and will include everything: perfumes, sounds, colors, thought, grappling with thought. Unquote. Do you agree with Rimbaud's opinion regarding the responsibility of a poet? What would you like to add here? We would this time start with Shamayita. Shamayita.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. So yeah, I think he mentions quite a few things, and the responsibility of a poet, if I am to say anything at all, then it is to represent his or her own time. A lot of documentation is happening right now because of social media. But as a poet, I think we have to choose the kind of social troubles that we are representing, and maybe we should preserve certain viewpoints. If uh, I mention this at the risk of sounding being very opinionated and picking up a political side, if at all. But I think that is what I, as a poet, strive to um, in my writing. I try to voice or represent our times. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shamayita. Now moving on to Madhu.
Uh, I don't know how Shamayita stole my answer, but but yeah, because I adore someone called Arthur, Robert Rauschenberg, and he is a neo-Dadaist artist, I guess, and he's basically a painter. And I experiment with a lot with my poetry when I do that, and something he said was similar, is that. Uh, an artist's work is to record his time in history. And I think at least the other three who are here, I know they do that. And at least, so yeah, I mean, one thing we are doing is we are responding to what is happening constantly. I mean, even though Shamayita said privilege, but yeah, I mean, even it's a choice that what we do with our privileges. And I think we are doing the right thing by documenting or having, or at least squeaking with the little voice we are getting through our pens and spaces, at least. And I think so yeah, it's definitely because it's not about always that's a very inhumane way of looking at things, or international funding, or a very European way of impact, the idea of impact. I think, I mean, when the wind is blowing, it's not thinking what it's giving an impact on you. It's like that. You're writing. Your job is to write, and you just write, and there's no idea of impact. So but yeah, I mean, responding to the quote with a quote, I think I would like to quote Salman Rushdie here, is like, a poet's work is to name the unnameable, to point at frauds, to take sides, start arguments, shape the world, and stop it from going to sleep. And I hope we can do that.
Beautiful. Thank you, Madhu. Now moving on to Suhit.
Well, it's a thank you, Varsha. It's a wonderful quote by Rimbaud. But I would like to say that it is the job, or it is possibly the privilege of everybody who's writing or creating art to do what Rimbaud is saying. The human see when Rimbaud was writing, certain terms were very much in vogue, like soul, etc., etc., which today we don't really, we question every term that is given to us by the previous generations through poetry and through other forms of expression. So I think that it is basically the writer's or the artist's job, in whichever discipline she is working, to examine all the various contours of existence as they are presented to us in the current time. And definitely poets are a big part of that. Poets, among other people, have some sort of special antenna which basically takes a very metaphorical look to what the current situation or the current ideosphere is full of. So I think, yes, anybody who's an artist has the capacity, has the capability to express the human spirit in the way that Rimbaud intended.
Thank you so much, Suhit. Now moving on to Chandramohan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Varsha, for this great quote. So I agree like wholeheartedly with this quote of Arthur Rimbaud. But and also the question: do you agree with Rimbaud's opinion regarding sports poet? Or what would you like to add here? So what I would like to add is this. I like to keep it brief. So the poet should strive to possess an evocative language, to reinvent language, and the role of an artist is to perceive depth, irrespective of whom it reaches, irrespective of whether whatever. I like to say this statement, which maybe subsumes some of the aspects we are trying to talk about. So the role of an artist is to pursue depth, depth in its in its narrative, and primarily poetry is about language. Primarily, first and foremost, poetry is about possessing that language that grips our soul. No, it's about being an artisan in the uh, in the uh, in the jungle of language. So it is like to possess a kind of language that has impact on the world. So if I would be so there are a lot of language philosophers who say nothing exists outside of language. So it is the the way we work around languages that creates the cultural world that we live in. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chandramohan. Moving on to our fourth question, and again, I would be starting with Shamayita. How do you externalize your interiority in poetry? Can you name some of your poems which bring your interiority in the best possible way till date?
So there are certain repetitive issues that I pick up on while writing. Say, for instance, there in the recent book, there are two poems about mental health issues. Then there are quite a few poems about um, harassment in the public sphere or domestic violence that women go through. Um, but during the lockdown, while I was writing with some kind of a guilt, where I see the country is suffering so much, and the government, all it has to offer is distrust and neglect. So that has sort of transpired into my poetry. Yeah, and otherwise, I think all of us are writing about sadness, grief of some kind. Um, yeah, so that those are the themes that I have been writing on as of now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Shamayita. Moving on to Madhu.
It's I realized the beauty of the question when it was so obvious in front of me like this, because otherwise it's such a subconscious process that you don't realize it. And
Right.
thank you for
True.
the question, though. Yeah, because that's what I was thinking. It's all so beautiful, like in a way it's amalgamated very much. And of course, coming from the space, as I told you, like even my writing comes from a lot of even my choice of poets are very, I mean, what in a high culture, if I could say, would be called pedestrian. And so the question is what, because that's what I tried to do when you were talking of poetry couture. And very openly speaking, now that I can, because it's been so long since I started, is that I know people who, and Chandra and other, at least they were seeing through this whole process. Because when we started open mics, or when we started encouraging more people to write, and so yeah, there was a huge question all the time. Isn't the quality being compromised? Aren't people going to write trash? And the youngsters? So you might have seen one of my poems, which I will end up reading. Is I mean, what is so? Because if you are not going to encourage people to write, if you're going to be so yeah, even the process of the idea of the poetry, where it is coming from. The I think. So what was in a way ghetto poetry, or what people started terming as calling as ghetto poetry, or things like that, started becoming mainstream. I mean, an open mic would be attended by any poet of any repute. Keki Daruwala to everybody has attended an open mic now. So yeah, the idea of the internalization or the externalization of the way we are writing. So my poetry comes from those kind of. I'm a more radical poet. So yeah, the process is very amalgamated. And yeah, I mean, some of my poems would be artist, which like was even read in the South African Parliament recently to pass their budget for artists, and that was a. So yeah, there are many poems which are internalized, but in a way written in a way. So yeah. So we'll get to the reading later, and you can figure out. Yeah.
Thank you, Madhu. Moving on to Suhit now.
Oh, yeah. So how do I express my interiority through the poems? That's a great question, and I must say that there is, at least in my writing, there is some sort of a tension between the urge to reveal oneself to the world and the urge to conceal oneself from the world. So there is that tension, these opposing forces that are also working within me. And so I have dealt with them by creating these personas, by speaking, by ventriloquizing, by talking in various other characters' voices. So in the first book, it was not me speaking. This is not Suhit Kelkar speaking, but neither is it not me speaking. It's it's me ventriloquizing through a centaur, so that you cannot actually say, oh yes, this comes from the autobiography and this comes from the imagination. There is always that sort of ambiguity as to, you never know which aspect of a poem has come from the autobiographical aspect of the poet and which part has come from the universal or imaginative aspect. So basically, my way of dealing with my way of bringing the interiority in front of the reader is to sieve it through a series of alienations, a distancing or disguising mechanisms. So I'm gradually learning to move out of that framework, but I still find it is useful in various contexts. So even in the collection that I am now working on, although there is a narrator who is saying I in almost every poem, that narrator is not necessarily myself. It is a hybrid quantity. So interiority is in my case, to answer you in short, interiority is expressed in a very, very complicated way.
Well, thank you very much, Suhit. Moving on to Chandramohan now.
So about externalizing my interiority, I believe that the themes that on which I write poetry, all these are subsumed in it, unaware of myself, right? I generally feel that poets on the margins seem to have a focus on certain themes, say about inclusivity of language, or the stark class or caste differences, or whatever. And like these happen unaware of themselves. People tend to write on on which there is urgency for them to speak on. So I like to like this. There is this particular poem of mine, uh, which is about which is titled "A Local Train Conversation." It's about a journey in a train, and seemingly innocuous questions are actually attempts to know your caste. Like then the conversation can be set to texter based on what caste the person I'm talking to. So like where I'm being spoken to. So I have seen that. There are other train poems by some of my friends, some of my contemporaries in India, who's they have a very different vision about train. They think about train as they imagine various kinds of people in a in a Mumbai metro, and the poet imagines a brief moment of equity between them. But if there is a conversation, look at the way this conversation happens. So I'll just briefly read out a local train conversation. As the station moves, I glance at the elderly man seated opposite me, still like an inanimate cog in a wheel. His insidious queries insist with his swift knife tongue, are like a handshake prolonged to probe the pulse of my wrist. He tries assessing me with an in-swinger first. What is your full name? Then he tries an outsinger that seems a lot. What is your father's name? By this time, he has lost his nerve and tries on a swift Yorker. What is your caste? Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, outstanding. Thank you so much, Chandramohan. Uh, I have read that poem a lot of times and I can't stop reading it again and again. It is so good. So thanks again. Moving on to another question now. Again, beginning with Shamayita. Shamayita, can you talk about the process of crafting your poems and how does the journey unfold?
Yeah, okay. So am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So, yeah, I generally, these days, in recent times, I have realized this whenever I'm reading some kind of poetry, Maybe I read 2 3 poems in one go, and then suddenly from within there's this voice that is tapping me. So maybe this is an initiator in itself, where I'm reading. I write and I keep getting back to these pieces that I've written, and there's a lot of rewriting, editing that goes on. There are moments when I wake up in the middle of the night with a dream, and that transpires into poetry. So, the working of the subconscious mind that affects a lot of us writing. And another space, I mean, it seems very awkward that I'm mentioning this at all. When I'm taking a bath, that is the time when we are cleansing ourselves, and a lot of new emotions evolve. So that's also a moment of looking for pieces of poetry. So, but then again, rewriting and reading good poetry is something that I would probably advise. Also, I mean, it's an advice that I would give to new poets. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shamayita. That was a much needed advice. Moving on with the same question towards Madhu.
Yeah, I mean, as Shamayita said, I think reading is definitely a good space to begin any kind of writing, and yeah, I mean, I know Rupi Kaur is famously quoted for saying, "I don't read a lot," and yet she. So yeah, I mean that's not the best example to begin with, but. And so I think because there, I mean, it also it's like a musician saying, "I don't own any instrument, musical instrument." So yeah, you need to buy books, you need to read, and also if you want to look at the beauty of poetry, I think you also need to be someone who can discover great things or look at things which are not sold to you by in just normal bookshops or beyond or Vogue magazines or things like that, or things which are just sold to you by the large market bodies. You need to look for, like, if I some of my favorite poets, like be it Hiren Bhattacharya, or be it any kind, I mean, Mura Singh, who is a tribal Kokborok poet, or Vidrohi ji in JNU. I mean, these are not the poets you would just find on HarperCollins or Rupa. So you need to be someone who likes, and also, I mean, it also comes from who you are and what you're trying to write and what you're trying to look for. But yeah, importantly, because yeah, this would happen often that young students would come up to me and say that, "Oh, I'm trying to write Neruda. I'm trying to read Neruda or Bukowski." I'm like, okay, are you looking closer home? Are you trying to look anything closer home? Even South Asia, even Indian poets. So yeah, that is a huge. I mean, you get a bunch of names. That's a good space to begin with, and there's nothing wrong about it. But yeah, you need to look beyond. So I think looking beyond is something that I have always done, and most of my poems would come from there. And I don't know, the act of writing poetry in a way is also for me like the metaphor of lactating mother. I mean, I need to write something. I mean, maybe it's a poem, maybe it's a micro something. I just need to write something. At least sometime, otherwise the ideas would just get swollen, and my mind would just get heaved and painful, and so yeah, I need to feed the paper, and as a like a lactating mother, I need to feed it, otherwise I'll be in pain. And also there are times that being a writer, that you want to feed the child, you want to feed the paper, but it doesn't happen. So yeah, poetry is also something which happens. Like, it's not something that you're going to, like, if I want to write, like, I have never been able to write a good poem on my mother. I've always wanted to, like, I have badly wanted to, couldn't ever. I mean, nothing that I could share with my mother that, "Mom, I wrote a poem for you." Like, so exactly that feeling. So yeah, it is a mix of both. It is a mix of meditation and exercise, where you are going to write something. I mean, and the way being, of course, you just pen an idea somewhere, and then you end up sitting with the poem at least around 10 times, and just having a chit chat like you would have a talk with a friend over drinks or over whatever. But you need to have a talk with your poem a lot, and then yeah, somehow things get refined and it comes on. I think that's mostly about it.
Thank you so much, Madhu, for putting it so beautifully and bravely. Moving ahead towards Suhit Kelkar.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So first thing that I can think of is that no poem comes to you fully formed. Every for at least it doesn't. In my case, I don't think there is anybody in the world who has just taken pen to paper and like a machine gone from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, and voila, what you have is Kubla Khan in his pleasure domes of delight. No, 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 it doesn't happen like that, at least not for me. So poem for me is a series of fragments that it is the exact opposite of what a glassmaker does. Okay, a glassmaker makes an intact sheet of glass, and during the course of its life, it is broken. But for me, the broken shards come first, and I have to assemble them or to weld them or to forge them into a coherent mosaical whole. So it is an act of so purely from a technical point of view, for me, poetry writing is either an act of pastiche, either an act of collage, or it is an act of, do you know how a crystal forms? If you have seen a crystal forming in a solution, first you get a little kernel, and then something grows here, and then another thing grows there, and then something grows from another end, and before you know it, you have a fully formed crystal. So either there is pastiche, or there is crystalline growth, or you get a big messy, or you get a big mess like a pile of spaghetti, and you have to unravel it. So it's a messy process. The point is that it's a messy process. It's not a scientific process. It's an artistic process. So it's you unlike painters who get their hands dirty and have something to show for it. We don't get our hands dirty, but it's an equally messy process. That's what it's like for me. I can't speak for others, but that's what it's like for me.
Thank you so much, Suhit. We usually talk about the final product, but we rarely talk about the difficult part, which is the journey
Yeah.
about poetry. Thank you so much for putting it so beautifully. Moving on to Chandramohan.
Yeah, yeah. The process of crafting a poem, in my opinion, writing poetry is all about editing. Writing is like editing. So unless you're editing, I'm just taking notes. I'm just taking notes. It is a process of editing that makes the poem worth poetry. So that's the process. So if you to ask me the kind of process or whatever, so I just first write out a phrase, an interest, which I think is poem, which is like a skeleton, and once that is there, I try to fill around the flesh, so that overall it becomes well toned, whatever. But then it's about editing. It's about rewriting 100 times, reworking your draft. I think it's I believe all of us are familiar with it, and so there is no none of us are different from the other when it comes to act of writing. So all of us have the process in which we write it down, or we look for various bits and pieces from wherever we can collect, and we try to build a whole narrative, whatever. So it's there. So basically, I'd like to just stress the fact that writing is more or less editing. Yeah.
Thank you for putting it so honestly, Chandramohan. Thanks a lot. Now we'll move on to our next question. Beginning with Shamayita again, how does criticism of the contemporary reviewers, critics impact you with reference to your work of art?
My book has come out only in December, so I'm still actually waiting for reviewers to write to me, or in general post their work. Howsoever, there have been certain kinds of criticism or reviews that I have received of my pieces, and I think actually even before I can say how am I supposed to, or how I generally pick up, um, since we are talking to young students over here, maybe I should address them as well. So if you are writing, if we are writing, I think the first thing that we should do is stop looking for external validation. That is a very important thing for young writers. And then the kind of criticism that comes our way, we are supposed to pick up the constructive ones. You know, positive, negative, both should be accepted, but look for constructive criticism. At least that is what I tend to do. Now, there would be a lot of unsolicited advices coming our way. Some of them coming from people who are not even who might not be too good with literature. I don't know how to put it, because again, at the risk of sounding very elitist over here, literature is for everybody. However, there are other ways of, there are some certain specific ways of providing criticism as well. So maybe we should, be aware of such kind of criticism, whether and most of our readers, they often try to um, see poetry as something which is just all form and no content. Poetry is not that. You have to comment on the content as well. So look for maybe we should look for criticism that are directed towards the content. Yeah, that's all I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamayita. Madhu.
So criticism apart, even now that Shamayita is starting off, getting book reviews for young poets is not easy. And we have, thankfully we are all in the younger lot here. And we are also trying to break that ivory tower of poetry, and that itself has been a thing in India. And so I think Chandra should also speak on this later. That how you could send it to the Hindu, but then again, are you that privileged to get reviewed? Is another question. Forget your poetry, because the world is like valuing your poetry. There is value to your poetry, but the point is, the equations of who will be reviewed is, I think, an essay on its own, and somebody should pen at some point of time. So the politics of that is totally different. And because I'm happy to say that, because we all four are young poets here, and we have a long way to see through. And but the good part is, we ourselves have started reviewing, at least so our fellow poets ourselves have started finding spaces. There is a lot of young reviewers who does a good job. For Samin Ali is there, who is Shamayita's friend, and also my friend, of course. And and then there is Paresh, and there are other people who do a good job. Then there is Uttaran, who tries to see through that in business standard. If we all in the community, someone writes, he tries to. So yeah, so we, the good part is, gone are the days of when poets were not supporting poets, and really it's a nice and a good time to see through. But that being said, I think criticism, it's not as if it's not required at all. Again, I would go back to something I said. The source of criticism is very important. I think where is that criticism coming from? If you already have a small writers group in your college or something, and you are just doing the rounds, you're critiquing yourself, and that's a good place to start. Just saying, why did you use the word sea and not lake? And because, do you think the sea matches this poem? Do you think a river would match more than that? So even those kind of discussions, a healthy discussion. So I think that is somewhere there is some void with it, and that should be encouraged. And definitely that kind of positive criticism, as Shamayita was saying, because otherwise, so to end with, I would again end with a quote of something which I love and I say in my workshops. Is like, there's a real case quote in Letters to a Young Poet. Nothing touches a work of art so little as words of criticism. They always result in more or less fortunate misunderstandings. Things aren't all so tangible and sayable as people would usually have us believe. Most experiences are unsayable. They happen in a space that no words ever has entered. And more unsayable than all other things are works of arts. Those mysterious existence whose life endures beside our own small transitory life. So yeah, deep down, it's a transitory life. Do a lot of artwork. Forget what critique is.
Thank you so much, Madhu. Suhit.
Yeah. So I just like to say that, in my experience, there are two forms of criticism. One is the kind of criticism that you see in your, in your like newspapers and all, which is the kind of professional criticism. And we don't have. There are new spaces that are coming up now. Uttaran Das Gupta, for example. Semin Ali is another example. Like all the examples that Madhu gave, they're very, very valid. But there is another kind of criticism which is important to a writer, apart from this kind, which is also important. The other kind is that of a close friend or beta reader. There is a phrase called a beta reader, an alpha reader, beta reader. So when you're writing your drafts, you show it to somebody, a friend or another fellow writer, and they give you a very honest but very kind appraisal of it, saying, "ऐसा क्यों लिखा तूने? Justify this, or this is not working, or that is a false note, or you can shrink this, you can, so the suggestions can be foundational, they can be structural, they can be technical, they can be aesthetic, whatever. I find in my experience, it is the second kind of criticism which has helped me develop the most as a writer. The first kind of criticism is good because it is good for the overall culture, and it makes you feel good ki bhai chalo, at least somebody is reading me. But the second kind of criticism, which is very close, which is given to you from a sort of inner circle, that criticism is invaluable. It is worth its weight in gold, really. So I would suggest that one should seek out that kind of criticism from what in Hindi is known as a hitachintak, from a well-wisher or a friend who really cares enough about your work to be honest to you about it. I think I would love that kind of criticism any day of the week.
Well, thank you so much, Suhit. Moving on with the same
Yeah,
question to
thank you
us,
so much for that
Chandramohan.
question. So first of all, so I remember a quote by Jayanta Mahapatra in an interview that's available in YouTube, in which he says, in the early 60s or 70s, when he used to write poetry, he wouldn't publish that because the kind of criticism that he seeks was not available in the Indian English poetry ecosystem. So he used to say that the criticism I seek wasn't available here then in the 1970s or so. That's number one. Number second, it is generally believed that the Anglophone poetry from the Caribbean is of a very high literary acclaim. It is of a very high, it's of a very high quality. The poetry is of a very high quality. So there are people like Derek Walcott, there are people like Kamau Brathwaite, Linton Kivsey Johnson, Lorna Goodison, the recent year's Elliott Prize winner Roger Robinson, or people like Claude Rankin, the female poet Claude Rankin, who has this very famous book Citizen. These kinds of poets have emanated from the Caribbean because the culture of literary criticism, the culture of poetry criticism, Anglophone poetry criticism from the Caribbean is very, very strong. So it is this very strong school of criticism that provides us the springboard to launch, to write, to conceive, to conceive and to write really good poetry. So the critique is a poet's greatest friend who, like just like the proverb, failure is a stepping stone to success, or whatever. It might be ironical to say that it is a critic who, the culture of criticism that creates poetry, creates very good poetry. So that's what I look up to. Secondly, in my writing career up to now, probably because I may be the only Dalit poet or whatever, currently writing, and in the circle of poets like Madhu and others, I like my poetry has been like scrutinized or reviewed more than I have dreamt of being reviewed, or like I'm scrutinized more for my identity than actual writing. So there is always a inclination or drive or that ambition to possess good language, to write poems in various forms, write poems in diverse on diverse themes, etc. So all these emanates because I inherently believe that there's a huge audience watching me, and I can write like 10 poems of in 10 different forms, or bring in new content, attempt something in the form of school, in a newspaper report, or I write something which is like a present, like a diary entry, or write something in the form of a intelligence bureau report on a comrade. So let's assume Madhu is a cultural worker of poetry. So there's this very secret uh, report filed by the police station in his home state about Madhu. So imagine such a poem. So these kind of inspirations, these kind of, I get this audacity to experiment, because I inherently believe there's a huge, a lot of people reading me and scrutinizing me and like whatever. So like, offering criticism or whatever. So it is that culture of the reader as well as the critic that nurtures a good poet. Yeah, thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Chandramohan. That was much important to say. Now, I would request our audience, if they have any questions, to please drop in the message box while we start with the reading session of our poets. We would like to begin with Shamayita with a poem. Shamayita, please read out your poem.
How many can we read?
Well, I think two.
Two?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm audible, right? Yeah. So this poem is titled "Women." It is about domestic violence. Some days my tongue is a knot, on another my hair. Hair knots are easy to hold while dragging her from one room to another. The husband, an enraged ball of purple haze, unwilling to think straight. Some days I leave my bed warm, dripping with my child's laughter. On another, it's a piece of wood I must renounce. The difference between love and violence is a distance from survivors huddling in snow to the hovering rescue helicopter whose random selection leaves a window too tiny for hope. So that's one. Do we go for a round of discussion around it, or should I move on?
You can move on before we get questions from our audience.
Okay, so I'm divided about which I have chosen three poems to read, but I think I'll go for a shorter one. Yeah. So this is something that I would probably want some kind of a feedback also on from the four of you. Um, I haven't read this anywhere before, but okay, let me give it a try. On loving, a tap on the door, and we release each other from our embrace as if loving calls for a secret endeavor that mustn't turn into stories, lulling toddlers to sleep for such sleep might infest sinful dreams of lovemaking in their shiny little head. So this is about the kind of taboos that we live with, things that we cannot talk about in conversations. Yeah.
Thank you, Shamoita. That was a beautiful one. I really like the shorter one as well. Both of the poems, actually. Thank you so much. In the meanwhile, I request all of you to keep posting your questions if you have any. Now, moving on for a small poetry session towards Madhu.
So yeah, I too will keep my poems short. So this poem is called a Read. Read this poem loudly as you can. Don't be ashamed. Don't think it'll be lost and void. Don't bother about who is listening. Don't worry about who will understand. For long we have read poems quietly, selfishly to ourselves. We have been unwilling or scared or thought no one cares and put them back on bookshelves, erased them from the streets. kept poetry from lighting revolutionary torches. For long we have let dictators speak loudly and thought poetry will stand and say something back. Not unless we read poems loudly, loud enough to reach beyond the radius of hate. Loud enough to reach beyond the radius of hate. The next
I think you moved to
Madhu, you have
mute
gone
yourself.
mute actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I have the same problem as Shamayita, but well, I'll just try to read the poem Artist because that was written during the pandemic in response to artists being rendered non essential. And that's the name of my upcoming book, Being Non Essential. Artist. I don't mind being non essential. Even a child takes its mother for granted. It does not run back to its mother until it is hurt. Nobody first thinks of water when they arrive at an exquisite dinner party until they are choking. I don't mind being the non essential, knowing you will come looking when things are broken and nothing else works. Art is non essential until it is not. So, what I wanted to, I don't know if I can show this. Of course, I'm not going to read, but yeah, so because we are speaking of the kind of work we do, this is one of the poems that was inspired by, uh, so this is called Dibang Dam Project. So inspired by the neo-Dadaist in a way. So there was a poem written on a page with a pencil, and then I erased it, and then I submerged it in water, and the poem was submerged in water, and this is the print on the book. It's called Dibang Dam Project, and the words on it are, the beautiful habitat of Dibang Valley that was home to tigers, mishmitakins, leopards, bears, squirrels, and musk deers have been carefully erased and submerged like this poem, because a dam is being built in the Bang Valley. So this poem is like, in a way, that. So I love the idea that a poem can leap off the page, and not just to the stage, but to the streets, but to anywhere you want to become a performance. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Madhu. Uh, I love the poem Artist. I have been reading it so many times, I can't tell you how many times. I have forgotten the count actually. Moving on with Suhit's poetry session. Suhit.
Thank you, Varsha. I'll read two poems about the non-human inhabitants of this planet. The first poem is called The Ant Queen. The Ant Queen. With her own jaws, she chewed off her wings. They nourished her until her first eggs were laid. Now, as the pulsing heart of pullulation, she fills chamber after chamber with generations emanating like concentric ripples from the bindu of her body. The urge to multiply is heady and fulfilling, and her destiny besides, or at least seems to be. Sometimes she feels a fluttering at her back, having sold the sky for the colony's sake. If she dreams of lost flight, what of it? Thank you. Now, the second poem is about a pet cat, a house tabby. It's called The House Tabby Speaks. The house tabby speaks. Why won't he eat what she takes pains to hunt just for his relishing? A squirrel, a rat, or a pigeon plonked in the middle of the room where he can't miss it. He sighs and pats her on the head. The gift goes in the garbage. It's not offensive, it's only baffling, like his bathing afterwards while yowling raucously, and as she thinks of it, his sleeping through the thrilling night when the darkness within should come out. At such times, she fears he's insane, but it is to him she's given her all. She can't help it. Her claws come out at the sight of him, longing to tap a vein of his, to lap up a little blood. For you are most intimate with what you eat, and she wants him to be a part of her. Why does he avoid her? Surely she doesn't smell of the hunt. Separation is agony. Why does he torment her so? In yearning, she calls to him. He approaches, her eyes close. She becomes a puddle in his lap, purring as he strokes her head. If only he was less strange, she thinks, what would she lack in this world? Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Suhit. We can keep on listening to your poems all day, actually. Now moving on to Chandramohan Satyanathan for his poems.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Varsha, for this opportunity. So I'll straight away get into the poem. My poem goes, this poem has a format of a newspaper report. Probably some of you are familiar with this poem. The poem is titled Accident and Following Wrangling Over Naming of Rivulets. Staff reporter, Kabani, November 5. 20 bodies of poets and translators were recovered from the shores of a river near the state capital. Intertwined, and the river crisscrossed a border between the two states, built along thoughts and linguistic states. The camp director had warned the participants of the translation workshop that spirits of other participants could leap into theirs, and each of them were given aliases, like a plastic steering oar that yields to either up or down streams of the river. The poets claimed that to be baptized in a form of poetry in another language, it was necessary to nosedive into a particular river. Some of the translators were also language teachers. They allegedly danced on the hanging bridge, hoping that their students weren't around. Another prospective reason for the onset of the wrangle was that poets demanded dope during their short recesses. They insisted that poems be written and consumed in the same tongue, like dope bought directly from the source, before being chopped up. Some poets may have died due to narcotic overdose, can only be confirmed after autopsy reports are made public. Yeah, thank you. That's one poem. That's one poem. My last poem, like the other poem I want to read is this. So this poem is titled Serving Quarantine, and it is sort of modeled around a Charles Simic poem titled Serving Time. So Charles Simic has a very iconic poem by name Serving Time. So this poem is kind of inspired by that. It draws its inspiration from that. Serving Quarantine. Before being remanded to the death row of the sick. Before being remanded to the death row of the sick, I was locked in a cell the size of my smartphone's screen. I was locked in a cell the size of my smartphone's screen. Serving my time, I read many books. First, on pathology and medicine, then the Indian Penal Code. Then came lexicons of necessity and the end rhyme between need and greed. Finally, books on economics to choose between two nightmares. First, death heralded by a sensation of drowning. Second, the prospect of a slow, starving death. A little ventriloquism surrounds me. Yeah, that's all. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, to have shared. So I have a closing remark.
Thank you so much,
I have a
Chandramohan.
closing remark. I was so
Yes, yes,
reminded
please.
of Madhu's poem, which really caught the imagination of a lot of people, and that poem scores high work of art too. Now, just compare this his efforts, his poem, with the kind of debate that is happening around this lady Amanda Gorman. I believe her name is Amanda Gorman, who is the who read a poem at the Biden inauguration, but the like accidentally was just muted. you know. Like the criticism around her is that it's not really a poem and it's something. It's like a motivational speech sort of thing written for an occasion, etc. But Madhu has very carefully achieved both objectives of writing a good poem and that poem being so suitable, that captures the our life during the quarantine, whatever lockdown era, and it scores as a very good poem too. So so that's something that inspires me.
Thank you
Maybe like
so
all of
much,
us have some
Chandra. That's
comments
so
about the
high praise coming from you.
yeah.
You know that.
Also, maybe
Yeah.
some of us have some comments about the inaugural poem at the Joe Biden inauguration, the whatever the new president's inauguration. Most of us are poets, and like a poet gets such an opportunity to read an inauguration function, and look at the kind of discussions and deliberations around that. Just my thought. That's all. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Chandramohan. There was a moment when Madhu talked about, poets being at the margins. Actually, that one is incident suddenly brought the poets out of the margin to the center, I believe. A great gesture, actually. So, thank you very much, Chandramohan, for those amazing two poems, and thank you for bringing in this. Talk about the uh, reading out of Amanda Gorman's poem during the inaugural ceremony of Joe Biden's. Now we have few questions. Although I know we are running short on time, it's already 4:42. I have already taken a lot of your time, but there are some very short questions from our students coming up. Not many actually. So any one of you can decide who will pick which question. I'm leaving it upon you. Um, there is a question by our student, Aransha Banwal. I know we have already discussed about this, Aransha, but this is a repetitive thing. She is asking, do you try more to be original or to deliver to readers what they want? Madhu, would you like to speak something on that? You are mute.
Sorry,
Yes.
sorry if you're going to hear squeaks of my son who is walking around with his squeaky shoes. But yeah, I mean, no, no, no. I don't think. I don't know. What I feel is that's a very good question. And if you should cater to somebody, no, the artist's work is to serve the art, and whatever it takes for him to serve the art first. I mean, the question you got to ask yourself, and I think Chandra can add. Right now, Chandra read a beautiful, different format poem of a staff reporter, and that is such an important poem because it changes the form of how we look at poetry. So exactly, are you trying to expand the horizon? Are you really doing everything in your might to distort as well as build the idea of what people think is poetry? I mean, fine. So I mean, because poetry has room for both the despair and hope. So yeah, if Amanda wrote about hope, or if I think if you should play to your people who are reading you, yeah, the first job is to cater to the art. For me, I mean, this is totally personal thing. I think the artist's first job is to cater to the art. The next job is to cater to people, because again, poetry for me is also a sense of reminder. It's not always, definitely it's a aesthetic, it's language and everything. I mean, the way you put it is very, I mean, that is poetry. But also what poetry to me is also a sense of reminder what should go in. I mean, people need to be reminded, and we need to be reminding of ourselves of our responsibilities in a way. So yeah, those two things. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Madhu. I think that was enough. Another question is, how difficult do you find it as a poet to question or challenge the man-made concepts of historical Masiha? Suhit, would you like to say something about that?
Uh, Yeah, it's an interesting question. Because it's very interesting that this question has been raised in a forum on poetry, because if you go into the very history and prehistory of poetry, poets were often patronized by rulers and powerful people to write odes in favor of them. So if I'm just going to sort of reinterpret this question a little bit, tweak it a little bit, instead of saying Messiah, let us just say, is it the job of the poet to do PR for somebody? In this current world, we don't really have messiahs anymore, but we have people who pretend to be. Is it our job to prop them up? No. The answer is clear, it's not. But where the concept becomes a little more nuanced is when you say, what then is the job of the poet? Is it the job of the poet to tear everything down, to tear down the legitimate claim of someone to an exalted status? And I would say that then in that case, one is not looking at poetry the way that I would like to look at it. It's not the job of poetry to record, it is the job of poetry to illuminate. Illumination doesn't mean that you are propping up a messiah. Illumination means that you are lighting up something from within, using your craft and using your technique. Poetry is an invitation to... The messiah is never human. The messiah is always superhuman. Poetry is an invitation to say, look at the humanity in what I'm trying to tell you. At least that is the way I look at it. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have. That's pretty much how I stand with regards to poetry and the act of doing PR for messianic characters. I hope that answered your question.
Well, it did. I think so. At least for me, it did. Thank you so much, Suhit. Another question is from that question was from Ghanishta Verma. This is a question coming from Shrishti Singh. Poetry is the revelation of a feeling that the poet believes to be interior and personal, which the reader recognizes as his own. So, how does that line by Salvatore Quasimodo seem to be talking volumes about the potency of poetry? Chandramohan, would you like to take that up? You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, so the question is about the potency of poetry, right?
Yes,
I
right.
think poetry is very, very powerful. Like people are not even people don't even realize how art grips them. Art grips their soul unaware of themselves. So I think poetry is extremely powerful. Number second, poetry may be changing now, but poetry traditionally has very less market. Even like very reputed poets struggle to sell their book, quote unquote, sell their books. So what gives poetry tremendous power is that it eludes the market. The moment there is, maybe it's changing now and then, I don't know, it's going to be very probably very intriguing, conflicting, whatever, very challenging, tricky times of poetry in future. If if the ecosystem around poetry grows such that a very good poet's book launch is a major event in a city, then I think I'll be very happy for such a situation to arrive, where poets are read and thoroughly deliberate upon, and books are bought, and like publishers trust you with their money. Publishers trust each poet with their money. That's good only. But then, but generally it's said that poetry is very free, and like I don't know, I wouldn't say free. It's not constrained by the market. It is not constrained by certain, I don't know, anything that may tie it down. It's because there is hardly any money, and people write it out of their own volition, write with their own conviction. So these are the two two observations I have about the potency of poetry. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Chandramohan. This is the last question that we are picking up from the lot, and it is coming from Jyoti Jaiswal. And Shamayita, I'll put this on you. Do your poems define you as a person? Bracket in real life. And then she also says, because it seems you all poets have a soul in your words. So it is coming from a very young reader towards all of you. Shamayita, please.
Yeah, so I think we all stand for certain kinds of ideologies and beliefs that we, um, yeah, so and that gets reflected in our poetry. So maybe bits and pieces of us, our real selves, our real lives, are also writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Shamoita. So with this, we come to the closure of today's event. Thank you so much, Suhit, Chandramohan, Madhu, Shamoita, for taking out time from your real busy lives. And I could see Madhu struggling with his kid and still, focusing on the session. Thank you so much for all the troubles that you guys take for
No, no,
such
it's a
events.
pleasure.
I
Please
had
Thank you,
enjoy.
something
Varsha.
to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please, Shamoita, go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having us here. It has been lovely. This is the first time I'm actually in a panel as a poet. So this is a different feeling altogether. But I would also take this opportunity to reach out to all three of you, Madhu, Suhit, as well as Chandramohan. I had dropped a mail to you all. So if you could kindly
I was going
check
to
that.
apologize publicly.
No, no,
Okay,
it's all
fine.
right.
Now I
It's all
do
right.
it.
Take your time. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was just hoping to hear back. Thank you.
So thank you so much. If there are some concluding remarks from all, four of you, and then we can say bye. Madhu?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Um, what do I even say? Like, no, I'm totally lost. Yeah. Why don't
All
Suhit,
right.
Suhit go ahead? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Suhit, give a
Okay.
final word,
So,
Suhit.
I know because it
Okay.
has been a long
Yeah.
while, a huge 2 hours. And as poets, you all need to rest now because you have spoken a lot. Usually, you all think a lot and then you put it on paper. But I'm really thankful towards all four of you for joining us here. To our esteemed guests who joined us here, to our students, thank you for uh, connecting with us. Thank you. You know, on I thank all of you on behalf of the Guru Nanak College fraternity. It was a great evening for us. I hope our students learned a lot from all four of you, and we hope to connect with you all in future programs as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.